My name is Naomi Calloway. I'm 30 years old. 11 days before my wedding, my own mother looked across her dining room at the man I was about to marry and said, with the calm of someone reading a grocery list, "You should know what you're marrying into." She got rid of her own child once. People like that don't change. My father didn't even look up from his plate when he added, "She lies as easily as she breathes. Always has." I sat there at the head of their good table, the candles my mother only lit for guests flickering between us, and I said nothing. I didn't argue. I didn't weep. I didn't bolt for the door. Because what my parents had no way of knowing was that the man beside me had already found her. He had spent the better part of a year quietly stitching back together the thing they had torn apart 8 years before. And they had no idea that the girl they'd worked so hard to erase was already coming. She was coming to the dinner the night before our wedding, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. That night, every secret they had buried clawed its way back into the light, and everything they believed they still controlled came apart in their hands. Before I take you any further into this, if any part of it is already sitting heavy in your chest, take a moment to like this and to follow the channel, and tell me down in the comments where in the world you're listening from and what the hour is where you are. It means more than you know to picture all of you out there. I'm Naomi. This is the story of how the two people who were supposed to protect me tried to dismantle my whole life, and how the daughter they forced out of my arms grew up and walked back in to save it. To make sense of it, we have to go back. Not 3 years. 11. Adam proposed on a Tuesday in late autumn, on the little iron balcony of his flat above a bakery in Providence. He timed it for the moment the street lamps came on, because he knew the gold light would catch the river, and he knew I'd pretend the whole thing was too sentimental and then cry anyway. He'd strung paper lanterns along the railing. When he knelt, he said, "We lost 8 years to other people's decisions. I'm not losing 8 more days to my own cowardice." I said yes before he'd finished the sentence. The ring had belonged to his grandmother, a small, old emerald in a worn gold band. She'd raised him through the years his parents were too busy falling apart to notice he existed. "An old ring," he said, "for the new family we're going to make." I should have known my parents would find a way to put their thumb in the wound. We chose a date in early May, a small stone chapel near the coast for the ceremony, a restored mill house for the dinner after. I sent out a little over 100 invitations. My mother phoned the morning after they went in the mail. "Calla lilies, Naomi? At a wedding? They're funeral flowers. What will the Hadleys think?" I had chosen calla lilies because they were quiet and elegant and asked nothing of anyone, because I wanted the day to belong to Adam and me, not to the people in my mother's prayer circle. But I didn't say any of that. I just said, "I like them, Mom." She let out the long, wounded sigh she'd perfected over 30 years. "Well, it's your day." And the way she said it, "your day," it landed like a verdict, like a thing I'd be made to pay for later. Adam's family was another country entirely. His mother drove up the first weekend after we got engaged and held my face in both her hands and cried. His older brother clapped Adam on the back and told him he'd done the one smart thing of his life. His aunt cornered me by the sink and said, "He came back to life when he found you again. You have no idea." I didn't. Not then. I planned almost the entire wedding by myself. My mother offered help and then turned every offer into an audit. The chapel was too plain. The dinner menu was too modest. The invitations looked, in her words, like something from a public library. I kept the seating chart on the corner of my desk, and I rebuilt it again and again. And I noticed, somewhere around the 10th revision, that with every version, I was sliding my parents' table farther from ours, closer to the door. I told myself it was nothing. Wedding nerves. The ordinary friction between a mother and a grown daughter. I was lying to myself, and some part of me already knew it. A few weeks out, my closest friend Dana found me hiding in the supply room at the school where I teach. Dana and I have known each other since our first year of training. She knows where every body is buried, including mine. She set down her coffee and said, "Your mom called me. She was asking strange things." "What kind of things?" "Whether you'd had any episodes since you were young. Whether Adam knew about your past. Whether you'd ever been in any trouble she should warn him about." My stomach turned over. She didn't say the word, but she didn't have to. She was digging, and she was digging in exactly one place. I stared at my cold coffee and said, "She can't know about Hannah. It was a closed adoption, sealed. Even I don't know where she is." I believed that completely when I said it. Dana just looked at me with the kind of gentleness that's worse than any warning. "Maybe," she said. "You tell Adam yourself, before it comes from somewhere else." "There's nothing to come out," I told her. "Closed means closed." I was wrong about that too, in more ways than one. To understand the dinner, you have to understand what my parents were protecting. You have to understand what they'd spent 8 years burying. So let me take you back further, to the version of me they thought they had buried with it. I want to say something first about the church, because if you hear small-town religious family, you'll picture the wrong thing. The church my parents belonged to wasn't some thundering hellfire place. It was a quiet, decent congregation that ran a food pantry and sponsored families fleeing war and put a banner out front every June. The kind of place that, over the years, had grown gentler than the people who'd founded it. My parents were among the oldest members, holdouts from a stricter era, staying on out of habit more than belief. The congregation around them had slowly become young families and social workers and tired, kind people who'd chosen mercy over judgment a long time ago. That difference is going to matter. Because when my parents finally tried to turn the church into a weapon, they would discover it was no longer the church they remembered. It had stopped being theirs years ago. I was 17 the autumn I met Adam. He was 19, finishing his last year before university, already certain he'd be an architect. We met because I was supposed to be revising for an exam in the public library, and he was sketching at the next table. I asked what he was drawing. He turned the page around. It was a house, low and wide, with deep windows and a porch that wrapped all the way around. "For someday," he said. "For when there's a family to put in it." He gave me that drawing for my 18th birthday. I still have it, folded soft along the creases from the years I carried it everywhere I went. We were together for 2 years. He left for university in the city. I was going to study to teach. My mother tolerated him the way you tolerate weather, with a tight mouth and the certainty it would pass. We thought we were careful. We weren't careful enough. The winter I turned 19, in my first months away at college, I realized I was pregnant. I took the test alone in the bathroom at the end of my dormitory hall, and I sat on the cold tile, reading the 2 lines over and over, as if they might rearrange themselves if I waited long enough. I should have called Adam. Instead, I did the thing a frightened girl does. I went home to my mother, because some small, starving part of me still believed she would hold me. I told her in the kitchen, crying. I said, "Mom, I'm pregnant and I don't know what to do." She didn't reach for me. She didn't ask if I was all right. She set down the dish towel, very precisely, and said, "We will take care of this quietly." I told her I wasn't ending the pregnancy. Something in her face simply closed, like a door pulled shut from another room, and she said, "Then we'll find another way." That was the moment they took the wheel out of my hands. Within weeks, they'd pulled me out of college, told the school it was a health matter, and brought me home. For the better part of a year, I lived in my childhood bedroom under a kind of soft house arrest, watching my own body change in a room papered with the things I'd loved at 12. They cut Adam off completely, They used my own phone to send him a message ending things, a few cold lines about needing space. And when he called, my mother answered and told him I'd asked not to be disturbed. He tried for a while. Then, because he was 19 and had no reason to imagine the truth, he stopped. I planned to run almost every day. I never did. I was pregnant and broke and had been told plainly that the moment I contacted Adam, every door would close. No tuition, no home, no help, nothing. So I stayed, and I let them arrange the disappearance of my daughter the way other parents arrange a dentist's appointment. She was born just before dawn on a morning in high summer, after a labor that went on so long the windows had gone from black to gray. My parents were in the room. So was a woman from the agency, with a clipboard and a smile that never reached her eyes. My daughter weighed a little under 7 pounds. Dark hair, already. I asked to hold her, and my mother said, "It's cleaner if you don't." The woman from the agency nodded, as if this were medical advice. But there was a nurse, young, not much older than I was. She looked at me, and then at the baby, and then at my mother, and something in her quietly refused. "I'll give them a minute," she said, in a voice that left no room for argument. And she laid my daughter against my chest. 90 seconds. That is the whole of the time I was given. I tried to memorize her, the impossible warmth of her, the weight, a faint birthmark on the back of her shoulder shaped like a comma, as if her story had been left deliberately unfinished. I told her I was sorry. And then my mother said, "That's enough now." And the nurse, with tears standing in her own eyes, took her away. They gave me something to help me sleep, and because I was 19 and shattered, I let them. When I woke, she was gone, in another woman's arms, in another house, with a name I would never be told. The next day I signed the papers. Closed adoption. No contact, no records, no updates, ever. My mother stood at my shoulder while I wrote my name and said, "One day you'll understand we did this for you." I went home and didn't leave my room for the better part of a month. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep without dreaming of those 90 seconds. My mother had the room I'd recovered in repainted within a fortnight. "No use sitting in the past," she said. They behaved, from that day forward, as if none of it had ever happened. I started seeing a counselor that autumn, a patient woman who told me, the first day, "You've suffered a profound loss. Grief doesn't keep a schedule." I said, "But I chose it, didn't I?" She held my eyes for a long moment and said very softly, "Did you?" Every year after that, on the morning of my daughter's birthday, I called in sick. I stayed in bed with the curtains drawn and counted the time since I'd held her, which was, and always would be, 90 seconds. My parents never once asked why I was always unwell on that particular day in August. They knew. And in the 8th of those years, on the day I'd come to dread like an anniversary of my own death, Adam walked back into my life. I had become a teacher in the end. I worked with the youngest children, the 4- and 5-year-olds, and if you'd asked me why I chose them, I'd have given you a clean, professional answer. The truth is messier. I couldn't save my own daughter, so I spent my days surrounded by other people's, holding their small hands at the crossing and wiping their faces and loving them in the safe, bounded way you're allowed to love children who aren't yours. My counselor once asked whether that was healing or punishment. I said it was probably both. I built a life that looked, from the outside, entirely whole. A flat of my own, friends, the occasional cautious date that never went anywhere. And every year, on that one morning, I vanished. I'd drive to the parking lot of the hospital where she was born and sit in the same corner, and I'd whisper the math of her age into the empty car. "You're 4 today. You're 6. Do you have my hands? Do you know you're adopted? Do you ever think of me?" Nobody ever answered. In a drawer at the back of my wardrobe, I kept a small wooden box, and inside it, 8 unsent letters, one for each birthday. I'd write them by hand, seal them, and lay them in the box on top of the others. There was no address to send them to. I wrote them anyway, because writing them was the only thing that felt like motherhood I was permitted. What I didn't know was that while I was grieving in my locked-down way, Adam had been living through his own long, formless ache. He told me all of this much later. He'd finished his studies and started a small architecture practice with a friend, doing decent, unglamorous work around the region. He dated. Nothing held. He told me, "Every woman I tried to love, I was secretly measuring against you. It wasn't fair to any of them." And in his old sketchbooks, from those very years, page after page after page of houses, and every single one of them had the same odd, unexplained feature drawn into the plan. A small room off the main bedroom, always facing east, always labeled in his meat hand, "Morning room, for the child." He told me he never knew why he kept drawing it. His hand simply did it on its own. 3 years ago, his practice won a small commission to redesign the staff areas and entrance hall of the very school where I taught. Pure, blind coincidence, the kind that, if you wrote it in a story, an editor would tell you to cut. He came in one gray morning with a clipboard and a measuring laser, and I was crossing the corridor with a line of 5-year-olds in tow, and we both stopped dead in the middle of the hall. 8 years. He was older, leaner, the boy sanded down into a man, but it was him, unmistakably him. The deputy head was introducing us. "Adam Reyes, our architect. This is Naomi Calloway, one of our teachers." And Adam just said, quietly, "We've met." I couldn't make a sound. He asked if I'd have a coffee with him when the children were settled. An hour later, we were sitting in the little cafe across the road with 2 cups going cold between us, and we talked for the rest of the afternoon. He said, "I never understood why you ended it. I never stopped wondering." So I told him. Most of it. I told him my parents had forced us apart, that I'd been pregnant when they did it, that I'd had a daughter in the high summer of that year and given her up in a sealed adoption. What I didn't tell him, because I genuinely, wrongly believed it, was that the child might be his. The dates sat close together, but my memory of that whole period was a smear of fear and sedation, and somewhere in the wreck of it, I'd convinced myself I must have been with someone else, after him, in the few raw weeks before my parents took over. Grief does that. It rewrites the facts to fit the size of the wound. I was wrong, but I wouldn't learn how wrong for nearly 2 more years. We started seeing each other again, slowly, both of us walking on the eggshells of people who'd been broken once already. He asked about my daughter often, gently. "Do you know where she is?" "No, sealed adoption, no information." "Would you ever look for her?" "Every day of my life," I told him. But I lost the right to look for her the day I signed. We fell back in love, and it was deeper this time, the way a thing is sturdier after it's been broken and properly mended. He came with me to my counseling sessions. He listened, he took notes, he asked careful questions, and I thought, how lucky I am. He's trying so hard to understand me. I didn't realize he was doing something else entirely. He was building a quiet, patient plan. The night he proposed, after I'd said yes, after the lanterns and the river, I told him the thing I should have told him long before. "There's something about the pregnancy I never made you face squarely," I said. "The timing. It overlaps with us. I always told myself it must have been someone after you, because admitting otherwise was somehow worse. But I don't actually know." He was quiet for a long while. Then he asked, very evenly, "Is there a chance she's mine?" And I made myself say it out loud for the first time. "Yes, there's a chance." His face changed, but not into anger, into resolve. "If she's out there," he said, "and there's any chance she's ours, I have to know." I told him to leave it. I told him closed, meant closed, that hoping would only hollow us both out. 3 weeks later, without telling me what it was really for, he ordered a home DNA kit. He sent his sample off, framed as idle curiosity, said he wanted to settle a family argument about where his people came from. The results came back a few weeks later. A tidy pie chart of ancestry. A scatter of distant cousins. No close matches at all. He stared at the screen and then said lightly, "Nothing there." I said, "I told you. She's probably not even in any of these systems." He nodded, but I saw the disappointment he tried to fold away. What neither of us understood then was that these databases are not still photographs. They're living things. Every time a new person spits in a tube and mails it off, the system quietly checks them against everyone already inside it. A door that's locked today can be opened by a stranger tomorrow. And a little over half a year later, a stranger did exactly that. In a city several hours south of us, a couple were sitting at their own kitchen table having a conversation about their 9-year-old daughter. The mother was a hospital pharmacist. The father taught secondary school geography. They had adopted their daughter as a newborn and had never once hidden it from her. At a routine appointment, a doctor had asked about the family history of heart conditions, and the mother had given the answer she always hated giving. Unknown. She's adopted. The doctor had suggested, kindly, that a DNA test might at least fill in some medical blanks for the girl's own records someday. That evening, the father said, "Why not? Worst case, we learn she's a bit Scandinavian. Best case, we get something useful for the doctors." They ordered the kit. Their daughter, whose name was Hannah, thought the whole thing was hilarious. She spat in the tube, sealed it up, posted it, and forgot all about it, the way 9-year-olds forget everything that isn't immediately in front of them. The results came back on an ordinary weekday, and the moment they entered the system, it flagged a match the very first night. Close family. Possible father. A name the adoptive parents had never heard. But the age was right, and the region was right, and the dates lined up with everything they knew about where their daughter had come from. They realized, sitting at that table, that they were probably looking at the name of Hannah's biological father. And at almost the same hour, a notification lit up Adam's phone in a town hundreds of miles away. A new close family match. Possible daughter. A managed account, a child's first name and an initial. Age 9. The right part of the country. Adam told me later that he sat alone in the dark and looked at that screen for the better part of an hour, his thumb hovering, not daring to breathe. Born in high summer. The right year, the right place. It had to be her. It had to be ours. But he didn't call me. Not yet. Because he knew that if he lifted my hope and then dropped it, if it turned out to be a coincidence or a glitch, it would finish me. So he did what Adam does. He made certain first. He found a man who'd spent 20 years as a detective and now, in his retirement, helped reunite separated families. Someone who knew exactly how far you could go through public records without ever stepping over a line. Adam gave him the scraps from the match. A child's first name, an age, a region. Within days, the man came back with the rest. A property in the city to the south, in the names of a married couple. The right ages, the right professions, one dependent child, female, 9 years old. School enrollment, which in many places is a matter of public record, confirmed the address and a name. Hannah, in the 4th grade, at a primary school whose website still had the previous year's class photographs posted online. 3rd row, second from the end, a girl with dark curls and a wide, gap-toothed grin in a yellow cardigan. The detective's report ran to nearly 30 pages. That photograph was on the first one. Adam told me, "She had my mother's curls, and your eyes, and a smile I'd have known anywhere. I knew before I read a single word of the report that she was ours. The only question left was what we were going to do about it." He chose a quiet evening to tell me. He sat me down, took both my hands, and said, "I found her." I laughed because I thought it was some clumsy joke. Found who? He turned his phone toward me. The match, the report, the photograph, and the floor came out from under the world. I don't remember the next hour with any clarity. I know I wept until I was hoarse. I know he held me on the kitchen floor. I know I kept asking how. How is this possible? And he explained it all. The test, the slow churn of the database, the detective. And then he said the thing that broke me open all over again. Naomi, the match doesn't say she might be mine. It says she is mine. We made her. The two of us. Because that meant I hadn't only lost 8 years with my daughter. I'd lost them with the father of my daughter, too. The one man who, had he ever been told the truth, would have torn the world apart to keep us. We didn't go charging in. Adam found a solicitor who specialized in adoption, and she walked us through exactly what was and wasn't possible. We were not trying to take Hannah back. That isn't how any of it works, and it isn't what we wanted. She had a home, a family, a life. We were asking only whether her parents might be open to contact, which the law in their region permitted entirely at the adoptive family's discretion. If they said no, that was the end of it, with no appeal. The solicitor sent a careful, respectful letter, making it absolutely plain that this was not a challenge to the adoption, only a request for the possibility of connection, if they were willing. We waited 3 weeks and heard nothing, and I began, in my well-trained way, to make peace with the silence. And then Hannah's mother phoned the solicitor's office back. We sat in that office, holding hands and barely breathing while the call came through on the speaker. Her voice was warm and steady, and the first thing she said was, "We got your letter. I want you to understand something straight away. My husband and I have always hoped Hannah would one day know where she came from." And then she said the sentence that turned my blood to ice water. We actually tried to keep some contact open right at the beginning, but we were told the birth mother had asked for a clean break. No letters, no photographs, nothing. We were told that was her wish. The solicitor asked, very gently, who had told them that. "The agency," she said. "They said they'd passed our offer along and that the mother wanted no further contact." I had never said any such thing. I had wept and begged for any scrap of her. The wish, they'd reported, had not been mine. It had been my mother's, spoken over my drugged, devastated head, and enforced for 8 years, while 2 good people raised my child, believing I had turned my back on her. Hannah's mother kept going. "She asks about her birth mother every year on her birthday. We always told her we'd help her find you the day she was ready. We had no idea you were out there looking too." By then, Adam and I were both crying and trying not to let it carry down the line. "We're not frightened of you," she said. "Hannah is loved by a great many people, and there's room for more. We'd be glad to arrange a meeting." We set it for the following month, supervised by a therapist who works with adoptive families, 1 hour at their home. They told Hannah ahead of time that her birth parents would like to meet her. She said yes before they'd finished the sentence. In the weeks before the meeting, her parents began sending things through the solicitor. Photographs, small stories. She loved to draw, they wrote, and she'd recently taken up the cello, and she announced at least once a week that she was going to be a vet. Her favorite color was a very particular shade of teal. They sent a scan of a picture she'd made the year before, a family portrait in wax crayon. 2 grown figures, carefully labeled Mom and Dad. A smaller figure in the middle, labeled Me. And behind them, faint, drawn in pale gray and unlabeled but for 2 small question marks. 2 shadow people. Her mother wrote, "She drew the 2 of you like ghosts she couldn't quite see. She gave the woman long hair and a kind face. She wasn't far off." I sat with that drawing in my lap for an hour. All those years I'd told myself I had no right to grieve her because I'd been the one to let her go. And there she'd been, all along, a small child grieving me too, drawing me into the corners of her pictures, waiting. The day of the meeting, their house turned out to be exactly as kind as their voices, full of light and clutter and a child's artwork covering every surface of the refrigerator. The therapist set out the simple rules. Let Hannah lead. Let her decide whether she wanted to touch us or keep her distance. Remember, this was her story at least as much as ours. And then she came in. Small, 9 years old, dark curls, in a teal dress she'd clearly chosen herself. She looked at me for a long moment and then said, "Are you Naomi?" Not Mum, just my name, which was right, which was more than I deserved. I managed to nod. She said, "I made you something." It was a scrapbook, cardboard and glitter and crooked stick-on letters spelling out Hannah's whole life. She turned the pages and narrated each one, not unkindly, not trying to wound me, simply showing me everything I'd missed. The first tooth, the first day of school, a recital, a holiday, a birthday cake shaped like a cat. When she reached the end, she looked up and asked, "Did you ever actually want me?" And I told her yes, that I had wanted her more than I had ever wanted anything in my life, that I had been 19 and frightened, and that my own parents, the people who should have stood beside me, had told me I had no choice, and that I had believed them, and that there had not been a single day since when I hadn't ached for her. She thought about that with the seriousness only children can manage. Then she asked, "So why didn't you come and find me?" And Adam, who had barely been able to speak, said, "Because we didn't know how. Not until now." She nodded slowly, taking the full measure of us, and then she asked if we'd like to see her room. On the wall was that same family portrait, the two pale ghosts in the back. She caught me looking. "I couldn't see your faces before," she said, matter of fact. "So I just did shadows. But I can fix it now." And she pulled out a tin of pens and very carefully gave the shadows hair and eyes and smiles and wrote our names underneath. Not Mum and Dad, just Naomi and Adam. Which was right. We hadn't earned the other words yet. We left with a plan. Gentle, regular visits, no rushing. Build something slowly and let her set the speed. In the car, I felt lighter than I had in 8 years. We'd found her. She was whole and happy and loved. And then, somewhere on the road home, the cold thought arrived. My parents still knew nothing. And the wedding was 6 weeks away. We saw Hannah 3 more times before everything detonated. Each visit, she let a little more of herself show. She played the cello for us, badly and proudly. She asked me whether her curls came from my side, and I said yes, and that her father's smile had come from his. On the 3rd visit, she hugged me goodbye, quick and shy and entirely real. And I wept in the car park afterward, like something had been returned to me that I'd never expected to hold again. On that 3rd visit, she also asked, with great casualness, whether she could come to the wedding, because her mom had mentioned it. Adam had the invitation in his coat pocket. He'd been planning to ask. That night, we sat up arguing, gently, about my parents. Did we tell them before the wedding, or simply let them find out on their own? Adam wanted to shield Hannah from whatever they'd do with the news. We agreed to wait until after the wedding. That was a mistake. We didn't get to choose the timing. My mother chose it for us, because 2 weeks before the wedding, on an ordinary afternoon, my mother was driving across the city to visit an old friend, and she stopped at a crossing, and she saw Adam on the pavement, holding the hand of a small girl with dark curls. She told me, much later, that her heart simply stopped. The child looked exactly like me at that age. She didn't call out. She did something far worse. She followed them at a distance, watched Adam see the girl safely into a blue-painted house, noted the street and number, and went home and spent the next day and night turning over public records and social media and old adoption notices until she had assembled, in her methodical and merciless way, the whole shape of it. By the following morning, she knew almost everything. She and my father came to my flat the next day. Adam had stepped out. They didn't knock so much as announce themselves, and once I'd opened the door, they came straight past me into my own front room. My mother said, "We need to talk about the child." "What child?" I said. And my father said, "Don't insult us, Naomi. We've seen them. You found her, after we told you, plainly, that it was finished." I said, "You told me a great many things that turned out not to be true." My mother's face went a mottled red. "We gave you a clean start," she said. "A future. And this is how you thank us? By digging up the worst thing that ever happened to this family 11 days before your wedding." I realized I was gripping a mug so hard that it had cracked along the side. I only noticed the thin line of blood on my thumb afterward. I told them to get out. They didn't move. My mother drew herself up and played what she clearly believed was her trump card. "If you don't end this immediately," she said, "we will tell Adam exactly what kind of woman he's marrying." And then she actually smiled. "Does he even know you can't say with certainty who the father is?" The lie came out of her so smoothly, so practiced, that I understood for the first time that she'd been telling it to herself for 8 years. "Adam is the father," I said. "We have the test. It's not in question." Her face emptied of color. My father, never one to be moved by facts, said, "Even if that's so, and I doubt it, the child is legally someone else's now. You have no claim." I said, "We're not trying to claim her. We're trying to be part of her life, which is precisely the thing you stole from all of us for 8 years. My mother's voice was shaking when she said, "If you go on with this, you will lose us." And I heard myself say, very quietly, "Good." They left. But I knew, the way you know a storm hasn't passed but only moved offshore, that it was nowhere near over. The 2 weeks that followed were the worst of my adult life. They tried everything. They threatened to tell the congregation I was harassing an innocent adoptive family. They tried guilt, reminding me of every sacrifice, real and invented, they'd ever made. They tried, grotesquely, to buy me off, offering to pay for some lavish honeymoon if I would simply make the whole business disappear. They warned me I would confuse and damage that poor child. None of it touched me, because none of it had ever really been about the child. It had always been about them. I blocked their numbers on a Wednesday. And that, I would learn, was the moment they decided to stop maneuvering and detonate. Their plan, as far as I could ever reconstruct it, was simple. They would corner Adam, assume he knew nothing, tell him the worst version of me, and watch him walk away. Wedding canceled. Shame contained. Problem solved. The last thing my mother said to me before I cut the line was, "If you won't listen to sense, then your young man has a right to know the truth about the woman he's marrying." And I said, "He already knows all of it. Every single thing." That's the difference between my marriage and yours. 2 days later, a stiff, formal dinner invitation arrived in my letterbox, in my mother's handwriting, requesting our presence at their home. I checked the postmark. It had been sent 3 weeks earlier, before any of this had broken open. They had planned this evening, this ambush, before they even knew Hannah's name. Now it would simply serve a second purpose. I knew it was a trap. But I also knew that refusing it would only buy a worse scene later. And Adam, when I showed him the card, said something that surprised me. "Let them try. I have all of it documented." I asked him what we'd do if they produced some lie I couldn't answer, some proof I'd never seen. He turned his phone toward me and opened a single folder, labeled simply with her name. Inside, the DNA results, the emails with Hannah's family, notes from my counseling, photographs of the three of us, a clean, legal timeline. Then, he said, we answer it together. The dinner was set for a Thursday, 11 days before the wedding. We drove out to my parents' house, the big, tidy colonial with the obsessively level lawn and the stacks of church directories on the hall table. My mother met us at the door, wearing her brightest, most dangerous smile, told Adam how handsome he looked, and me how very lucky I was, in a tone that made the second word an accusation. The dining room was laid with the good china, a roast in the center of the table, exactly as promised, and 4 places set, though only 3 of us had come. I asked who else was expected. Just family, my mother said. The 4th chair stayed empty all evening. I assumed it was a flourish, a piece of theater, an empty seat to represent something. I was wrong about that, too, but I'll come to it. We sat. My father said grace, and it was a long grace, and it was pointed, full of phrases about truth and honesty and the wages of deception. My mother served the roast, and as I lifted my fork to take the first bite, my father set his down, looked across at Adam, and said, "There's something you ought to know about Naomi before you stand up in a church with her. She had a child, years ago, gave it away, and she never told you a word of it." Adam set his own fork down, perfectly calm, and said, "I know." My mother blinked. "You... what?" "I've known for over a year," Adam said. "Naomi told me herself." My father recovered the way a man recovers his footing on ice, badly and fast. His voice climbed. "And did she tell you she has no notion of who the father even was? That after she threw herself at you, she carried on with half the town, and the child could have belonged to anyone?" I started to rise. My mother turned on me, cold as a blade. "Sit down, Naomi. The adults are speaking." And, God help me, out of 30 years of training, I sat. I went silent. My hands knotted together under the table until the knuckles ached, and then Adam's hand came down over both of them, steady and warm, and held them still. My father pressed on, certain he was winning. "She tried to trap some poor man with that baby, and when he came to his senses and wouldn't have her, she handed it off like an unwanted parcel." Adam let him finish. Then he looked my father directly in the eye and said, very quietly, "Actually, I know exactly who the father is. And your daughter isn't the liar at this table. You are." The silence that came down was total. My father said, "What are you talking about?" Adam said, "I'm the father. A DNA test confirmed it more than 6 months ago." My mother's face went chalk white. My father said the timeline was impossible. Adam laid it out for him like a man reading evidence into a record. "She was born in August. Naomi and I were together that winter. You separated us in the new year, when she was already 2 months along. You forced a sealed adoption to bury your own embarrassment. Shall I keep going, or have I got the dates right?" My mother found her voice, and it came out high and thin. "You have no right." "No right to what?" Adam said. "To know my own child? That's a remarkable thing for her grandparents to say." My father stood up. "Even if you are the father, the child is adopted, legally gone. You have no claim on her." And Adam said, "As it happens, we've been seeing her for 6 weeks now." My mother made a sound like the air had been knocked out of her. "You've what?" Adam took his phone from his pocket, set it face up on the good china tablecloth between the candles, and said, "Her name is Hannah. She lives in a blue house in the city, with 2 people who actually wanted her, and she knows precisely who we are. He opened a photograph and turned the screen toward them. It was from our 3rd visit. Hannah, between Adam and me, all 3 of us laughing, and in her hands a sheet of paper on which she'd written, in careful 9-year-old capitals, "See you at the party." My mother leaned in, and her voice dropped into something genuinely venomous. "Don't let her snare you the way she snared. She gave away her own flesh and blood. There's something wrong with her. There always has been." Adam's voice never rose. "She didn't give anyone away," he said. "You took her child, and now you're about to lose your own." My mother shot to her feet, trembling. "If you persist with this circus, we will not set foot in that church, and we will make certain that everyone we know hears precisely what sort of person she is." Adam stood too, unhurried. He picked the phone back up and opened the folder. "Before you make any phone calls," he said, "let me tell you what's in here. The DNA results, establishing that I'm her father. The emails from her adoptive parents, who, by the way, tried for years to keep contact open and were told Naomi had refused it, which was a lie you arranged. Notes from the counselor Naomi has been seeing since the year you did this. Records from the birth showing how hard she tried to refuse. And a statement from Hannah's mother about the messages and offers that were intercepted before they ever reached Naomi." My father's voice came out tight and careful. "You've been assembling a case against us." "No," Adam said. "We've been protecting a little girl from you. They aren't the same thing." My mother played her final card, the one I think she'd been holding all along. "Then we'll come to your wedding," she said. "And when the priest asks, we will stand up, and we will object. And we will tell that whole church what she is." I stood up then myself. The emerald ring was still on my finger. I looked at my mother and I said, "Then you won't be coming to the wedding." She laughed, a short, disbelieving bark. "You cannot uninvite your own parents." I said, "Watch me." She tried once more, swinging wildly now. "Fine, have your reunion, but I will telephone those people tonight, and I will tell them you're unstable, that you're a danger, that you've been hounding their family." And Adam said, evenly, "Please do. They already know the whole story, the real one, including the part you played in it. They have it in writing. And they have their own lawyer." My mother's composure finally cracked straight down the middle. "You planned all of this," she breathed. We've been looking after our daughter," Adam said, "which is what the 2 of you should have done 11 years ago." I said the last of it myself, because it was mine to say. "After tonight, you are not invited to the wedding, or to the dinner before it, or to anything else. Ever. You stopped being my parents the night you decided you'd rather control me than love me." We put down our napkins and we left. We drove 10 minutes in complete silence before I could speak. "They won't go quietly," I said. "They'll find a way to make a scene." And Adam said, "I know. That's exactly why I invited them to the rehearsal dinner." I turned in my seat and stared at him. "You did what?" He explained, calmly, what he'd set in motion weeks before. He had sent my parents a formal invitation to the dinner the night before the wedding, back when none of this had yet exploded, because he had already guessed that they would learn about Hannah sooner or later, and he had decided that if the reckoning was going to come, it would not come in a quiet room where they could later deny every word of it. It would come in the open, in front of people, with witnesses who knew me. The dinner would have 40 guests, both families, our closest friends, colleagues, and a handful of the younger church members, the kind ones, the ones who'd chosen mercy long ago. "If they make a scene there," Adam said, then Hannah will see, with her own eyes, exactly why we kept her away from them. And everyone else in that room will see it too. They won't be able to rewrite it afterward. There'll be too many witnesses. The fortnight that followed was strangely peaceful. With my parents' numbers blocked, the air went quiet. I threw myself into the wedding and went to see Hannah twice more. She was thrilled about the dinner. Her mother had helped her choose a white dress with a teal sash. "So it matches your wedding," she explained, very pleased with herself for thinking of it. I asked Adam, more than once, whether we were doing the right thing, whether we were about to traumatize a 9-year-old for the sake of a confrontation. He said, "She is far stronger than you give her credit for, and she has the right to understand why her family is shaped the way it is." I wanted to believe him. I held my breath instead. The dinner was at the Mill House, the same place we'd booked for the wedding meal, in a long private room with windows onto the water. We'd folded the rehearsal dinner together with a welcome party for the guests who'd traveled, about 40 people in all. Adam's family from out of state, my colleagues from the school, his business partners, old friends from both our pasts, 5 of the church members, the ones who'd actually liked me, and, at a table set deliberately near the door so they could slip out with her the instant anything went wrong, Hannah and her parents. My own mother and father arrived a quarter of an hour late, which I understood at once was on purpose, an entrance. My mother in navy and pearls, my father in a dark suit, the two of them looking for all the world like the upright, church-going couple everyone in that room had always taken them to be. Adam's sister leaned close to me and murmured, "They actually showed up. Are you ready?" I said, "No. Let's do it anyway." The dinner began, ordinary and warm. The food was good, people laughed, the speeches started. Adam's brother told an affectionate, embarrassing story about him at 19. Dana told one about me from our training days that made the whole table groan and grin. Adam's father stood and spoke, his voice thick, about losing your way and finding it again, about second and better chances. My parents sat through all of it, with faces like closed shutters. And then Adam rose, and the room settled into quiet for him. He said, "Most of you know that Naomi and I were together when we were very young. What you may not know is that we then lost 8 years to each other. We were pulled apart by things that were never in our hands." His eyes moved, for just a moment, to the table near the door. "But 3 years ago, we found our way back. And this time, nothing was going to be allowed to come between us again." He looked at me. "Naomi is the bravest person I have ever known. She survived something that would have hollowed most people out, and she came through it kinder than she had any right to be." He paused. "And there is someone else here tonight who has been wanting to say hello." He turned toward the door. It opened, and Hannah's mother walked in, holding the hand of a small girl in a white dress with a teal sash. The whole room went silent. Hannah crossed the floor, her eyes fixed on me the entire way. My mother's face drained to the color of paper. My father half rose from his chair and then sat heavily back down. Hannah reached me and smiled up at me. "Hi," she said. "I'm Hannah." And then she turned to face the room, and in a small but perfectly clear voice, she said, "I'm Naomi and Adam's daughter. Biological daughter. I've got 2 moms and 2 dads now. It's actually really cool." Somewhere toward the back, a colleague said, half laughing, half astonished, "You have a daughter?" Dana stood up. "Yes," she said, "and it's the best story you'll ever hear. Let them tell it." So Adam told it, briefly and plainly. 8 years ago, Naomi and I were separated. She was carrying our daughter, and I never knew. Her family arranged a sealed adoption to keep it quiet. For 8 years, we believed she was lost to us. A DNA test brought us back together. And Hannah's parents, here tonight, have been more generous than we had any right to hope. Hannah's mother stood, her hand resting on her daughter's shoulder. Hannah has a great many people who love her, she said simply. We're glad to share her with Naomi and Adam. My mother stood up. Her voice was unsteady. This is entirely inappropriate. That child should not be here. And Adam's sister, who had never met my mother in her life, said clearly, I'm sorry, and who are you? My mother drew herself up. I am Naomi's mother. And Adam's sister said, the mother who forced a 19-year-old to give away her baby. That mother. My mother said, we did what was best. And Adam's father, on his feet now, cut across her. Best for whom? Not for Naomi. Not for that little girl. And the truth of it was, the whole room had turned to look at her, and there was not one face in it on her side. My father reached for her arm to steer her toward the door, and she shook him off, and she did the thing I will never forgive and never quite stop being grateful for, because of what it showed everyone. She turned to a 9-year-old child in a white dress and said, you do not belong here. And Hannah looked up at her, small and unafraid, and asked, are you my grandmother? My mother said, no. And Hannah said, Naomi told me I have a grandmother and grandfather who didn't want me to be born. Is that you? The silence in that room was a physical thing. My mother opened her mouth, and nothing came out. Hannah went on, in the relentless, honest way of children. She told me she wanted to keep me, but you wouldn't let her. Is that true? My mother managed. It's more complicated than that. And Hannah, with devastating simplicity, said, it doesn't really sound complicated. And then, an elderly woman stood up at one of the church tables, someone who had known my mother for the better part of 30 years, and she said, Patricia, I have known you a very long time. I have never been so ashamed of anyone. And after that, they came one after another. A colleague of mine saying I was the gentlest person she'd ever worked beside and that I deserved every happiness. One of Adam's partners saying that this was the most beautiful family he'd ever seen assembled in one room, and that anyone who couldn't see it knew where the door was. And then, worst of all for my mother, her own people, the church members, turning. One of them said, quietly, forcing your child to give up her baby, that isn't anything Christ ever taught. And the elderly woman said, Patricia, you need to go. This is a celebration, and you are spoiling it. My mother seized my father's arm. She made for the door, and at the threshold she stopped and turned and said, You'll regret this, Naomi. Every one of you will regret this. And then she was gone, and the door swung shut behind them, and the whole room seemed to let out a breath it had been holding. And then someone began to clap. And then everyone did. They stood, all of them, and it was not applause for two people being thrown out of a room. It was for something else, for endurance, for loyalty, for the courage of a small girl in a white dress, for two strangers who had opened their family rather than guarding it. Hannah looked up at me, baffled. Why is everyone clapping? I said, Because we're a family. She said, All of us? I said, All of us. And she looked at me, shy and hopeful, in a way that undid me completely, and asked, Can I call you Mum? Or is that strange? Because I've already got a mom. I was crying too hard to speak cleanly. I told her she could call me whatever felt true to her. She considered it with great care. All right, she said. Mom Naomi and Mom Sarah. Like that. And I took her hand in mine, the first time I had ever held her hand without a therapist sitting 3 feet away, 8 years too late, and held it anyway. The party went on around us. Hannah met Adam's parents, her other grandparents, who wept and folded her up in their arms and gave her a small, worn bear they had, it turned out, bought 8 years before and kept, never quite able to throw it away. The next afternoon, we were married. A little over 100 guests in the stone chapel by the sea. My mother and father were not among them. Hannah was our flower girl, in white, with teal blossoms, and she walked down the aisle ahead of me, and Adam wept openly when he saw the two of us coming toward him. We had written our own vows, and somewhere in mine was the line, "I promise to choose the truth, even when a lie would be easier, and to choose you, even when fear says otherwise." The minister said that a marriage was never really just two people, that it was the whole family you chose to build around them. And as he said it, I watched Hannah and her parents and Adam's mother and father, all of them, every one, smiling. We took a photograph afterward, the three of us, Hannah between us, all our hands joined. It stands on the mantel now, beside the only other photograph I have of her as a newborn, the one taken in those 90 stolen seconds. The two pictures, 8 years apart, finally in the same frame. A week after the wedding, I sent my parents a single letter, brief and final. I wrote that I would not be in contact with them again, that they were not welcome in my life or my marriage or my daughter's life, and that any attempt to reach me would be met through a solicitor. I wrote that they'd had 18 years to be my parents and had chosen, every single time, to be my wardens instead, and that I was choosing differently now. They never answered. I heard, later, through one of the kinder church members, that they had quietly left the congregation. Too many questions about a granddaughter no one had ever heard of, and no version of the story left that they could make themselves the heroes of. I had expected to feel guilty when I finally cut them loose. I waited for the guilt. It never came. What came instead was something I hadn't felt in 11 years, something so unfamiliar it took me days to name. It was relief. It was air. It was the particular lightness of a person who has finally stopped trying to draw love from a dry well. These days, we've found our rhythm, all of us. Hannah's home is still the blue house with her mom and dad. That's her family, her school, her life. But she's with us for dinner every Thursday, and one weekend in 2, and once a month, all 6 of us sit down together with a family therapist. Not because anything is broken, but because we'd rather keep it whole on purpose. She calls Sarah and Tom Mum and Dad. She calls Adam and me Mum Naomi and Dad Adam. And somehow, that arrangement, which would have sounded impossible to me a few years ago, is the most natural thing in our lives. Her school forms list 4 parents, and nobody blinks. There's a bedroom at our flat now that she chose the color for herself, a deep teal, with a corner for drawing and a stand for the cello she's slowly getting better at. She told a friend at school once, with great satisfaction, that having 4 parents is like having spare batteries. You never run out. People sometimes ask whether I regret cutting my parents off. I don't. What I regret is the 11 years I spent trying to earn the love of 2 people who were never going to give it, mistaking their control for care because it was the only thing they ever offered me. But I will never regret fighting to get my daughter back. Some families you're simply born into. Some you build carefully out of strangers who turn out to be exactly who you needed. And some, the ones that matter most, the ones worth absolutely everything you have, you fight like hell to take back from the people who stole them. We have done all 3 now, and we are nowhere near finished.